That's our go sign, I think. And good evening or good afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. But welcome to the Together Women Rise Book Club meeting. We're so happy to have each of you here. Gail Burchard, who is my colleague on the book club committee, will be joining me as a moderator here this evening. But before we get started, we have a couple of requests, three little requests regarding Zoom so that we can all have a good experience and you can have an optimal one. The first one is, of course, please mute your computer. It's very important that you remain muted throughout the presentation. And the second request is please go to the chat and let us know who you are and where you're from. We would love to see your messages in the chat. It's always fun to see we have people from across the country and sometimes around the world. Later on, you'll have an opportunity to put chat questions in for our author. But for right now, please let us know who you are and where you're from. And finally, the third request on the Zoom is, or recommendation really, you may want to have the speaker view rather than gallery view to have your optimal experience. So with those things taken care of, I would like to again welcome members, welcome visitors, and welcome guests, and a special welcome to anyone who may be here for the first time. And with those people in mind, please allow me to just take a moment or two to give a general description of Together Women Rise. And we are a powerful community of women and allies dedicated to achieving global gender equality. And we have hundreds of local chapters across the United States where members learn about gender equality issues. They give grants to organizations that empower women and girls in low-income countries. And together they build community to forge meaningful connections with each other and with women and girls around the world. Our book club is another way to engage in our mission and to learn about global gender equality issues and to experience community with others who care about making the world a better place for women and girls. For more information on our book club and on Together Women Rise, please go to our website, togetherwomenrise.org. Thank you. Now, I would like to take a moment and let you know what we're in for this evening. Tonight, we will be discussing the book, Breath, Eyes, and Memory. And our committee selected this book because it aligns well. I'm just going to check something here. Did I jump ahead or no? I'm good. I had 3 cards. I'm on number 3, right, Wendy? Okay, good. I'm good. So our committee selected this book because it aligns well with Second Mile Haiti. And that project will improve the long-term health and economic well-being of families by addressing malnutrition, maternal and child health, and women's self-sufficiency. Second Mile Haiti will be our featured grantee in April. When we looked for a book about women in Haiti, we were led to the book Breath, Eyes, and Memory. And we are so thrilled that its author, Louise Dandicat, is able to join us in this discussion. We're going to start off tonight hearing from our author, and then you will be able to put questions in the chat where Louise has graciously agreed to answer them. And following our time with Louise, we will break out into small. I'm just going to remind whoever came on, please mute. Thank you. And following our time with Louise, we will break into small discussion groups, and then we'll wrap up the evening with our book giveaway. So please make sure you stay until the end. I would now like to call on the Chief Executive Officer of Together Women Rise, Beverly Francis Gibson, who will introduce our special guest speaker. Beverly?
Thank you so much. It is my pleasure to introduce Edwidge Dandicat. She is a Haitian American author whose work focuses on the lives of women and their relationships. She also addresses issues of power, injustice, and poverty. In 1991, Edwidge moved to the United States with her family, and writing, something that she had always done since an early age, became a way for her to escape some of the unpleasant situations that she encountered. She is a graduate of Barnard College in New York with a BA in French literature. She also has an MFA degree from Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. Her master's thesis is partly autobiographical. Its account of the relationships between several generations of Haitian women and was published as Breath, Eyes, Memory in 1994. She has earned numerous honors and awards. She was the 2009 MacArthur Fellow and also the Pushcart Short Story Prize and awards winner from magazines such as The Caribbean Writer and Essence. In 1998, Breath, Eyes, Memory was picked by talk show host Oprah Winfrey for her television book club. With this selection, Edwidge gained a wider audience and a greater commercial success. She has published numerous works, and we encourage you to definitely look at some of her other writings throughout this evening and thereafter. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome you, Edwidge, to Together Women Rises Book Club.
Thank you so much, Beverly. Thank you to Linda. Thank you to all of you for being here, and thank you for having me. When I got the invitation, and it goes a ways back to come join you, and then I looked up your mission and what you were trying to do. I thought that I have to do this, and then tonight I get to see all your faces and have this conversation with you. So I think it will be a conversation. I'll be asking questions, but I wanted to start by just reading a part of the book that I often read, like an invocation. This book is almost 30. I just realized it's almost 30 years old. And the fact that people are still reading it and that we're able to talk about it, to me, is always extraordinarily moving. And I often think it's in part to these particular lines towards the end of the book. So I'll start with them, and then we'll go into the conversation. There's always a place where women live near trees that, blowing in the wind, sound like music. These women tell stories to their children, both to frighten and delight them. These women, there are fluttering lanterns on the hills, fireflies in the night, the faces that loom over you and recreate the same unspeakable acts that they themselves lived through. There's always a place where nightmares are passed on through generations like heirlooms, where women like cardinal birds return to look at their own faces in stagnant bodies of water. I come from a place where breath, eyes, and memory are one, a place from which you carry your past like the hair on your head, where women return to their children as butterflies or as the tears in the eyes of the statues that their daughters pray to. My mother was as brave as stars at dawn. She too was from this place. My mother was like the woman who could never bleed and then could never stop bleeding, the one who gave in to her pain to live as a butterfly. Yet, yes, my mother was like me. From the thick of the cane fields, I tried my best to tell her, but the words would not roll off my tongue. My grandmother walked over and put her hand on my shoulder. Tande, tande, listen, listen before it passes. Parole gen pied, parole gen zèle. Words have wings, words have feet. Let these words bring wings to your feet. There's so much to say, but time has failed us. There's a place where women are buried in clothes the color of flames, where we drop coffee on the ground for those who went ahead, where the daughter is never fully a woman until her mother is passed on before her. There's always a place where if you listen closely in the night, you will hear a mother telling a story. And at the end of the tale, she will ask, "Ou libéré? Are you free, my daughter?" Now you will always know how to answer. Thank you.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. Gave me shivers. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Wendy Fradlin. I'm the communications director at Together Women Rise, and I'm going to carry out a bit of a conversation with Edwidge. And as you listen and think of questions of your own, please put them in the chat. I'm sure you'll think of many wonderful questions that that we haven't been able to cover. Wow, listening to that excerpt from the book has made me think of so many questions. I'm going to be off my script, I think, a bit, but maybe let's start off with a little bit of an obvious question, which is the fact that the book is about Sophie, who traveled who at the age of 12 traveled from her village in Haiti to New York to be with her mother, who she barely knew. You also traveled from Haiti to the US when you were 12 years old. Your parents had gone before you and you were reuniting with them. I wonder if you can share with us how much of Breath Eye's memory comes from your own experiences, and how were maybe your experiences similar or different from Sophie's?
Well, I always, I think of Breath Eye's memory as a kind of emotional autobiography more than a straight up autobiography, because actually the way I started writing the book was when I was a teenager. I used to write for a newspaper that was distributed throughout high schools in New York City called New Youth Connections. And it was a time where, Haitian kids were getting beaten up in schools for being Haitian, and we were called names a lot. And most of everything that I wrote for that paper was just about sort of like normal things we did, like how we celebrate Christmas, like in my family, and all like cremas, bonbon, staying up at Christmas Eve and the present, and just kind of in a way, I guess, even back then trying to say, yeah, we're just like you. And then at the end of my run there, I wrote an essay about my first day in the US, which was when I was 12, and I was living in Haiti with my aunt and uncle while my mother and father were in the US. My dad had moved when I was 2, my mom when I was 4. And then one day, like out of the blue, I was told, you have to, the papers came, and in that time I'd seen my parents once when they came to get their papers. And then like when I was 12, it's like, okay, you have to now go to live with your mother and father and my 2 brothers who were younger, who were born in the US. So I wrote about that day of just kind of seeing my parents again for that paper. And then when I was done, I thought, oh, there's like more I want to say. So that really the spark was that experience of writing about arriving, what it was like to arrive at 12. And then I just, and then I made the rest of it up. I was not born as a result of a rape. And the rest of the people are kind of modeled about people that I know in my family, in different families. Like people were not tested. That's definitely in my family. It was in like a traditional family, but I knew people who it had happened to. So it was like a confluence of putting different things together. So but the feelings of being displaced, of just also always being in limbo, waiting for someone abroad to send for you who just happens to be a parent, which is a very common experience in the sort of the Caribbean immigration experience. But all that, I drew from that well, but the details, the autobiographical things themselves are not, just like, it's not a memoir, let's say.
You mentioned about how, coming to the US, how there was a fair amount of discrimination against Haitian people. You touch on that a little bit in the book, but you don't write a lot about Sophie's experiences in that way. Was that a conscious choice? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sophie's timeline is a little bit sort of not directly at that moment. But, you know, I came myself in 1981, and at that time in the US, there was, you know, AIDS, you know, people who've gone through this experience of AIDS now, have gone to 2 pandemics at this point, right? It's their second pandemic. The first one was AIDS, and Haitians were the only people who were identified by nationality as being high risk for a disease that at that point that people didn't understand. So in the building that I lived in, where my parents lived in Brooklyn on Westbury Court, you know, in East Flatbush, if a lot of people worked with, you know, with the elderly, they worked in restaurants, and then suddenly they were, you know, they were let go because people, you know, they thought they were contagious. I myself, in the school that I went to, they had a school trip where the Haitian kids weren't allowed to go. So so it was, for Sophie, you know, for me, that would have been another whole other book, you know, with that particular type of issue being addressed. So I don't dip in it too deeply. I mean, her sort of like what she faces in terms of discrimination is more of like sort of this, what happened after that period, you know, where the taunts were a little still bruising, but not so specific, because, you know, people often say like that book just has too much already. So I felt like that would have been just too many layer, like a whole other layer, and that needed more unpacking than this particular story I thought would have allowed.
Well, certainly one of the, you know, central concerns or themes in your work is, and I was reading one article that described it, how families are made and unmade by immigration. Can you talk about that a little bit in relation to the story in Breath Eyes Memory and in your work as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, just I think, and a lot of my stories reflect this, because I grew up in a way where family was defined very much more broadly than you know, 2 parents and some children. You know, the family was a lakou, sort of like a very extended group of people in a community, or within a family, an extended family who looked after children. And the way that, and that's the only way that my parents could have migrated and then have left me and my brother behind, and then build a life elsewhere, than to be able to send for us. And as I said, I think it's such a common experience for Caribbean migration. You know, there's so many people who, like me, who were raised by an aunt and uncle, or grandmother, or an aunt, or, you know, there's always someone who went ahead and then came back for the children, or sent for the children. So then what happens is that then you have a whole you know, you have to redefine the way you think of family. So I often think of myself as having had 2 fathers, you know, because my uncle who raised me was like a father figure to a lot of us, right? A lot of young people in the family who came through his house with my aunt, and then while their parents were in Canada, while their parents were in the Dominican Republic, while their parents were in the US. So so then you know, just the way family is defined is very malleable. You know, for 8 years in my life, I was with my mother, but I had all my aunts who were like mothers, who are so in the way that you're raised communally, which you lose in migration. And I realized that even, you know, very early when we moved to Brooklyn, that suddenly I was in a kind of parental role, because my parents were working all the time and I was the oldest daughter. So, and my mother, I remember in a very funny way, told me, you know, she's once told me, she's like, you know, you could spank your brothers. And then my brothers were like, there's 3 of us and 1 of you. Just try it. But in the sort of the way that you know, I was sort of, you know, and stand in for my parents, who were always working, you know, a lot, except, you know, weekends, and a lot of that was taken up with church. So I think it was just, in a way, the expansion of what family means, and then the way that neighbors can be family. For me, it's like, but when you think though in the more, contemporary or the more sort of legal immigration setting where we saw these separations at the border, for example, which still happen, and you see parents who with temporary protected status, if that's revoked, have to choose whether they stay with their US born children or go back and leave them with other people. That whole thing is like, there's so much power, that sort of in a way is taken away from you, and decisions that are made for you that are not necessarily yours. And then also the dynamic of family with language, right? Like how a lot of kids end up translating for their parents and have more language access than their parents. And then sort of like what the idea of like, who's the authority is flipped, so all of that, I sort of wanted to weave into a little bit in this book, but also, in later works that I have done.
Absolutely, thank you. There are references in the book to the patriarchal culture of Haiti. This is certainly something that Together Women Rise learns about in probably most of the countries that we work in. There's in particular this scene that I remember is when they're sitting outside, and I believe it's the grandmother, says something about, far off, that, oh, there's a child being born there, and let's wait and see whether it's a boy or a girl. And the description that if it's a boy, the father will be out and carrying him around and up all night with the boy, and the lights will be shining, and, almost a very celebratory nature. But if it's a girl, it's much more sort of subdued. And so was this something that you wanted to educate your readers about, this patriarchal culture? And have you seen that change at all over the years in Haiti?
Well, I mean, I think we live in patriarchy, right? Like American culture is very patriarchal too. Like we're still talking about women firsts in everything, and even in the United States, right? So so patriarchy is just built into the world that we live in. So I mean, of course, there's patriarchy in Haiti, but there's also, to contrast in a way, this and maybe part of it was done during the dictatorships, and also through this migration where a lot of men have to go away, or a lot of men were in prison during the dictatorship, where there are a lot of female-centered households, and where women, might be the structure is patriarchal, but women have a really sort of to the point that people and there's now pushback against that notion of being a potomitan, a middle pillar, but there's also very strong female headed households. For example, when I was growing up, like I didn't know what feminism was, but I saw it modeled. And my aunts, who many of them had not gone far in school because they were such powerful figures, they seemed to wield so much power at the same time. So I think absolutely there's a lot of issues with, patriarchy, gender-based violence, the sort of inequality of education for women, and extra vulnerability during insecurity. While at the same time, there's also women who hold it down, as the kids say, in spite of that patriarchy.
Yes, we're constantly amazed at the strength of women, and that was obviously very clear in your book. Another thing that we learn a lot about in your book is about deeply rooted traditions, and the virginity tests were certainly one of those things that was passed down from generation to generation, And, there are examples of this type of thing all over the world with female genital cutting. What do you think is needed to break the cycle of these types of traditions that are so deeply rooted in a culture?
Well, I mean, I think the first of all, again, the practice in the book was, for me, from the moment I wrote it, very singular to this family. And after the book was published, I did have women who, would come up to me and say, oh, this happened to, this happened in my family. And recently on an online publication called Aibo Post, AYIBOPOST, there were interviews with women who were talking about this happening to them. They called it tatetifi, like tapping girls. And frankly, personally, I had written this book, but I was surprised that there were women who were testifying on a very like modern video thing, sort of the psychological effect that it had on them, that in this current time. So it does happen. I don't want to minimize that, but it's not, it's not certainly, for me, it was like this family does that. And I wanted to show the effect of that. And I think when you have situations, which is kind of like it was for my mother and how she would have wished it to be for me, where you are trying to, and women all over the world who have read the book have also told me about how it expresses in their families, from honor killings to these practices where it's like a woman's virginity is seen as a kind of entry, right? Access and a way to marry up, and not just as a way, and that's not only a good thing for her, but it's also good for her family. So in this very sort of microcosm of this family, of this, the world of this book, that was a very important thing for this family. And so I think traditions, and we've seen it, with, you mentioned, FGM. So it's the women themselves who kind of lead the campaigns. And I know, like, there's Alice Walker wrote that wonderful book, and there was also a documentary called Possessing the Secret of Joy. And when I was, and Equality Now, for example, had campaigns against it. And often in the campaigns, they would put the voices of the women from directly who are affected by the different things, right? Who would speak out themselves, because we also don't want to speak for, now people are able to come forward and express that. So even like the Equality Now campaigns, for example, were great in the sense that they would have women from the culture speak and express what they feel about the different practices. So I think that's one way to deal with this. But again, mine is not, we have a lot of problems, but this is not one of them per se, in terms of what women are struggling with, globally, in a global way. But as I mentioned, and if you go to Aibo Post, there were some moving testimonials of women who talked about like the way this was done as a way to sort of preserve their virginity, but what that also means in terms of what a woman's body represents to a family, in terms of what it means for their honor, their respect, or their advancement.
Yes. There's a question here in the chat that I'm going to bring up now. Susan is asking if you could talk about the goddess, and I'm going to get this pronunciation wrong. Urzuli, the goddess Urzuli.
Yeah,
Am I saying that even close? If you can talk about the goddess and her significance in the Haitian culture.
Well, I mean, she's a Loa, a goddess, the spirit of Vodou, and this family, they have many different religious practices, right? So the mom is Protestant, the grandma is Protestant, and some of them are Catholic, and and their family Loa, their spirit is the goddess Azuli, who's seen as is the goddess of love. Also, the version that is this family talks about is sort of this warrior fighter spirit that they claim, that is theirs, that they pass on through generations and they see as a source of strength for them.
Yes. Can you talk a little bit about, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges facing women in Haiti today?
Well, I speak as someone who has so many people in my family still in Haiti, and a lot of them young women. I would say what they tell me, what they talk about, but also what the organizations that I follow, one of the biggest issues is sort of the overall insecurity that threatens everybody else in the country as well. The armed groups and the communities in which young women, who are within these communities are particularly vulnerable because they either fall under, sort of the protection of these groups, or, and some of them have had to leave the communities and they were displaced from places where they've lived. So that general insecurity and the way that it also leads at times to sexual violence, certainly education and the lack of access, especially for poor women, especially, women in these types of communities, that even if they do have a school that they can go to, can they travel freely to these spaces? Health, access to health, and health, in ways that are, also specific to women, women's being in the political space, making decisions, representing sort of half the population. Is that reflected in the political space? The political space is very, murky at the moment, but there are thankfully a lot of wonderful women and wonderful women's groups that have been around for a very long time. Groups like SOFA, with Solidarité Femmes Haïtiennes, group like CAIFEM, and there's some wonderful group like young women artists like Neges Maon, who are in the cultural space that also weave into the political space. There's a group called Nupab Domi, We're Not Sleeping, that was extremely active in the movement, the sort of Petro-Caribe movement, which was a movement that was demanding of the government accountability for monies that were borrowed from Venezuela through oil, as a shorthand to say all that. So yeah, there are a lot of issues that are, and rural women who often seem to be left out of the conversation. I come from a rural family, and I always had one aunt who never left that rural space. So I always got, even when I was in Brooklyn, got to go to the rural area to see the struggle of rural women as well. So all of that. And if anybody else, I know there's some women from Haiti here. If you have other things, please add in the chat as well.
Yes, please do. And any other questions? There's a few more here. I mean, clearly, Haiti has suffered more than any other Caribbean nation in recent years. And, I wonder, I know that this is a little bit beyond, a discussion about your book, but, I wonder if you might share your thoughts on Haiti's struggle and, what really needs to happen for this country to have a better future.
Well, I mean, Haiti has suffered a lot, but Haiti has been also penalized more than any other country. Ever since, since the Haitian Revolution, Haiti sort of squashed white supremacy and was punished for it, and had to pay this debt to France that was just purposely extended. So they did, we never really had a chance to sort of build the vision of our forefathers and foremothers, our foreparents, right? And so there's a sort of a context for that suffering, that vulnerability. Certainly we're on these fault lines, and we're in the path of these hurricanes. But there's also this sort of historical boat on Haiti's neck that remains to this day. So probably, I'm certainly not an expert, but I think it's so important for Haitians to finally be allowed to self-rule, right? To be allowed to follow their own visions, because I think every time that's tried, there's always sort of the swooping in from the outside, as though we were still in 1805, right up, immediately post-revolution. And certainly, I would say, yeah, definitely women leaders, young people, young leaders are definitely need to be a very important part of that.
And I see someone's put in the name of an organization. If anyone else has other organizations that they'd like to put in the chat, I think sometimes it's hard where people from a distance want to help, and they're not sure how, and they're not sure, they want to make sure that the help gets to the right people, to the people who really need it. And that's something that Together Women Rise works very hard on, supporting community-led organizations and projects where it is the people there in Haiti who are dictating, what they need and how, what the solutions are. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I think, I often think of that, the much quoted saying by Lila Watson, the Indigenous activist and academic, if you have come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let us work together. I think it's very important to work together. The other rural sort of place that I go to often is a place where my mother-in-law has, she's here part of the time, but she's there. It's like where my husband grew up, where he went in the summers, and my mother-in-law still goes, and it's a place in the South. And I remember once she was telling me a story of an NGO who came to that area, and they were well-meaning, but they hadn't quite consulted with the local groups, and they decided they were going to feed pregnant women. And wouldn't you know it, within 6 months, so many people were pregnant, like young girls were pregnant, because that's how they got that aid. So that's just one example of, so it's very important to consult, I think, if you know someone who, if you definitely locally led organizations, and people with a track record too, who have been there for a while. It's definitely, there are quite a few, and I think smaller groups too that may not be on everybody's radar. I think it's good. So again, people who are here, just pitch your group. I would say, I'll just say to, like, the Lumbee Fund of Haiti is a group that's been working on Haiti for a very long time that I know, and there's a group of young people working with educators, Haiti. There are quite a few, and if you know someone who's been working, like, that you trust, I think it's important to ask also recommendations locally around where you are. But
absolutely. And I think, your comment about, organizations that you may not have heard about. I think that's what Together Women Rise specializes in, is finding the organizations off the beaten path, sometimes at the farthest end of the path, and finding a way to support them. I want to turn just lastly, because we're gonna run out of time here. I want you to talk a little bit about your writing process. We've gotten all the heavy issues of the country, and we've solved all the problems of the world. Tell us how you go about, I mean, what's your process? How do you get your creative inspiration for your writing? And then I'm going to ask you to recommend to everyone. Someone asked, recommend to us your favorite book right now that you would suggest that we all read. It doesn't have to be about Haiti.
Okay. So my process, so I have 2 teenagers. I mean, I guess I can't say I have them. They have been lent to me for a time. Who are 13 and 17. And so when I just was living alone and was a single woman, I was a binge writer. So I would have an idea and I would just work away at it. I would brush my teeth and now and then, and I would just try to blurt it out, just get it out, do a draft, and then rejoin the world a little bit, and then go back and revise. But now I'm sort of a binge writer in bursts. So I try to do a draft in whatever time it takes me. And then I revise relentlessly. I overwrite and then I sort of chip away at it. And I try to make every word count, like every scene count. I'm a relentless reviser. But I think of it as like being a sculptor, you're given, ideas are amorphous sometimes, like a big rock, and then you're sort of chipping away until this form emerges, and then you polish and you polish until it looks like, it looks like presentable. And then if you put it outside, it rusts, and then you polish again. So
I love that.
That's my process.
What are you working on right now?
Right now, I'm working on a bunch of things, and that's not usual for me. I don't, there are people who are super productive during the pandemic. I was not. I was super terrified, and I had a lot of people in my life who passed away. I was at a lot of Zoom funerals, so I wasn't really I wasn't like, oh, I must write some fiction. So I wrote a few essays. I wrote about artists, and so I have sort of an almost finished essay collection. I have worked on some picture books, and we'll start a novel. I have a date. So now I'm kind of, this is part of the process question. I know times when I don't work. I'm like, in the summer I can't work, so I'm like, okay, I'm going to start my novel in when school starts in September. But in the meantime, I'm working on much shorter things.
Any sneak peek about what the novel might be about?
I am going to be very superstitious about that.
Absolutely. I understand completely. Okay, and last question. What book would you recommend? What's your favorite book right now? What do you think we should read next?
I would say Miriam Shansi's What Storm, What Thunder, which is a book that recently came out. It's in 12 voices. I think 12 or 10 voices. It's about the earthquake. It's called What Storm, What Thunder. And in a similar vein, there's a wonderful young writer, Francisca Monplaisir. She has a book called My Mother's House, and that was published, I think, in 2020, and soon in May has a book out called The Garden of Broken Things. And both, What Storm, What Thunder and The Garden of Broken Things are about the earthquake. Very different, but very beautiful. they're both Haitian. They both, Miriam is Haitian Canadian, and Francisca Monplaisir is Haitian American, I believe.
Well, I said to Edwige before we officially got started that we do have a Goodreads a group, Together Women Rise group. We have a fairly lengthy bookshelf already, but we'd like to have one dedicated to Haitian authors and Haitian stories. And so I will add these to our Goodreads group. And
yeah, and you're also, you have to write, you know, like the kids say, the GOAT, you know, the greatest of all time. There's so many, but Marie-Vieux Chauvet, for example, you know, Love, Anger, and Madness, Gigi Dominique, Yannick Lyons, Kitney Mars. There's so many. I'll send you.
oh, please
Send you the
do.
list, and then you can share with, we can share with the group tonight. But there's, to give you a taste, so I edited a couple of years ago this series called Haiti Noir 2. And they're short stories with a really good, I would say, representation of Haitian literature from Haiti and from the US. And all the writers I mentioned are in there, including Jacques-Stéphane Alexis, Jacques Romain, and Roxane Gay. So we go the whole gamut from Haiti Noir and Haiti Noir 2. So if you want to get a sample, and then you can look up their books. But there's a short story by quite a few Haitian writers in there.
That's awesome. I'm gonna turn it back to Beverly now, just to wrap this part of the evening up. Beverly?
Edwige, on behalf of the book club and Together Women Rise, I wanted to just thank you for just sharing your thoughts with us, sharing different aspects of your writing and the book and the content. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone attending this evening did as well. So thank you so much for being with us this evening. I'm going to turn it back over to Linda for any final words.
Can I just say before Linda, just thank you all very much for having me. And thank you, sorry everybody, I didn't get to answer the things in the chat. I'm not great at the multitasking, but someone was saying, if advice to someone who's never written but has an idea, you're back, just free write write like nobody's gonna read it, and then put it away and go back to it. So I wanted just to get this last one. Okay, thank you.
Well, we would love to have you stay. We're going to break up into smaller groups. That's part of our community building as well with these book club events. But we'd love to have you stay and join one of our groups if you would like. I think it's Gail who's gonna, or Gail who's gonna talk about the breakout groups. We're gonna tighten up the time, Gail, on it, since I always take too much time talking to the author, don't I?
Well, it's been wonderful listening to Hairditch and share all of the information. So it's sure we'll go forward. But the choices in our breakout groups, it's going to be listed in the chat there. What you might want to talk about is motherhood and nurture, home and emigration, patriarchal societies, or gender-based violence and rape. So Wendy will split us up into our groups, and we'll have, I don't know whether it'll be 5 minutes to throw out some ideas and to meet each other, to let each other know where we're, what group we're in or what chapter, and if you've read the book. And it's wonderful. I mean, for people who've not read the book, they're always welcome to join and participate in these meetup groups also, because it's all part of what we're doing and learning. So
absolutely. I think we'll take 10 minutes, just because by the time you get into your groups and introduce each other, it's almost done. But it's a great opportunity to meet people. So I'm going to open up the rooms now. Enjoy meeting some new people for a bit. Thank you, Edwige.
Thank you, everybody. All right.
Yes.
thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Keep reading.
Bye.
Bye.
And just to let everyone know, Together Women Rise, in honor and in thanks for Louise's participation tonight, we will be making a donation to an organization that she supports and that she recommends to us to thank her for her participation. So enjoy a little bit of time connecting with each other. I'll see you back here in a bit.
Well, I guess we're all back now. Anyway, I feel very honored that I was able to meet Beverly. Our new CEO is in my group, and along with my colleague running this, Linda. So, uh,
Uh,
this poll
uh,
here, I guess you see a poll on your screen at the same time that I'm talking here. So if you can go ahead and answer that at the same time.
Hey, Gail, you're going to pitch the June book?
I am. It says future big reads will feature The Girl with the Louding Voice by Abby Dare on Wednesday, June 8th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And we're fortunate to once again have the author join us. But now this is going to be changing the time at 12 noon because the author lives in the UK. So
Okay.
just be aware of that. So mark it on your calendar.
Can
I've,
you,
I've read this book and it's wonderful.
can you put all that in the chat? Thank you.
I think it will be, yes. And then also, always, if you go to the website, TogetherWomenRise, and go to the Join Us tab, there you will find all the book selections and be able to register also for the one that will be coming up in October, which will discuss The Night Watchmen by Louise Hairditch.
I'm actually fine. How's my booty?
And that date and time are to be finalized. But besides that, I want to invite everyone to attend the April National Webinar on Thursday, April 7th at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. And our speakers there will be the founders of Second Mile Haiti. And since April, it's and since this April is now Chapter Leaders Appreciation Month, we will be highlighting a few of our amazing RISE chapters, including a mother-daughter chapter in Sarasota, Florida, a Philadelphia chapter that created a study group for its members, a diverse chapter in St. Louis, and a special chapter for nursing students at Anna Marie College in Mass. There are so many unique ways to make a difference for women and girls. Join us on April 7th to learn more, or also go to your own chapter meeting in April, which will be featuring Haiti. So this will give a little bit more insight as to where we're coming from. So I think now we're ready to have the prize wheel book giveaway.
We are. Just quickly to share with you, sounds like everybody enjoys having the book groups. 97% people said they liked that, and 80% said they liked the length of the events. And evenly split 50-50 who are part of our Goodreads book club. So there are instructions on our website for how you can join that. Go to Goodreads, get an account, and then search in the groups for Together Women Rise. So I am going to give away 3 copies of our next book, The Girl with the Louding Voice, which you can see right here. And hopefully it'll be somebody in attendance, but even if they're not in attendance, we are going to award the prize to them in the hopes that they will read it and come to the next event. So here we go. Okay, Bonnie Goldberg. I don't know if she's still here, but we will be sending her a book. And now I'm going to remove her so she can't win again. And our second book will go to Maxine Anderson. Okay. And finally, our last book will go to Cindy Bagosius. I know your name, Cindy, but I'm probably not pronouncing it correctly. All right, so those books will be getting sent out, and encourage everybody to read The Girl with the Louding Voice.
And I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. And if you have other comments and you'd like to put them on the Goodreads book club, you're welcome to do that also, or recommend other books that you think that participants in Together Women Rise would enjoy. And thank you. And we'll see you next time. Go to the website. I just love our website. I mean, it's just from recipes to travel to the advocacy work that we're doing to our small chapters. There's something there for everybody.